Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Preston District Branch event, our first one for a while, so it's really good that you've attended. Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen. So I'm really pleased to facilitate this event on behalf of the Preston and District Branch Committee and members. And I think we've got a really interesting programme this evening. Hopefully will take us no more than an hour and a half. We'll definitely be finished off by 8 o'clock tonight. Just to introduce myself to start with, I'm Mark Ainsworth. I live in Preston. I'm a business analyst by day and branch secretary of the branch by night. So I'm particularly pleased that we've managed to get an event sorted and organised, and appreciate your time in attending this evening. So what else have we got to look forward to this evening? We have got a couple of great talks. We've got Kevin Rigotti, who's going to tell us about his research at the University of Central Lancashire, UCLan. His research into Agile UX practice and the fascinating interaction discovery research project. I'm looking forward to hearing about that. And then we've got John Verity, who has many years experience working with charities and enabling digital inclusion. John currently is the Digital Inclusion Development Manager at UK Blackburn with Darwen, with the all-important with Darwen at the end. You're welcome. And at the end of each of the talks, we'll also have the opportunity for questions and answers. And I can see that people have already started putting little chat messages in the questions, so thank you very much. Hopefully in the webinar software you can see where you can enter questions. So if anything does occur to you during the talks, we'll leave them till the end, and then I can see all those questions and I can bring them up with the speaker, with Kevin and John, which will be great. This event is being recorded, so there will be the opportunity. It will get posted by British Computer Society, so people will be able to, if you need to leave early, or if you're a glutton for punishment and want to hear it all again, then you'll be able to. I'm going to round off the evening with, as I hope you've seen, there's been a survey sent round just to try and capture the members' views from our branch, and I will share. It's early days; it's only been a couple of weeks, but I'll share the responses so far, and hopefully there'll be more to share in the near future. And then we'll say thank you and close. So, without further ado, I will hand over to Kevin Rigotti, and I'll just allow Kevin to become the presenter and to take it from there. Thanks, Kevin.
Okay. Right, hello. My name's Kevin Rigotti. I'm a research student at UCLan. So the usual caveats apply. If you like it, UCLan deserves some of the credit. If you don't, the blame is all mine. I've included my Twitter ID on the front slide there, and you'll see that I've actually illustrated most of the slides with little bits from Twitter. If you're interested in user experience design generally, then Twitter is a good place to be. There's lots of very active design-oriented people, particularly in Manchester, that are active on Twitter. So you can find lots of useful stuff on there, information about talks and things like this. I'm an engineer. As an engineer, I naturally define engineering broadly enough to cover the things I want to do, and, well, hopefully exclude things I don't want to do. So that's the definition I used last year when I tweeted about Ada Lovelace Day. Engineering is imagining a better world and making it happen. That's the important bit. Anyone can imagine a nice boat. The tricky bit is sitting in it without getting wet. So as engineers, we all want to make a difference. whether that's this year's trendy gadget that's going to make us stinking rich, or just a better screwdriver. So that means ultimately thinking about consequences. So what about design? Design is an integral part of engineering. Now, that should not be a controversial statement, but I guarantee a big response if you say that on Twitter in the wrong places to the wrong audience. People who identify as designers can be very protective of the title and can be reluctant, shall we say, to accept that design happens at every stage of development. And in fact, even after the product's complete, if it has to go through some kind of approvals process, you might still have limitations placed on its use that impact on design. So end to end, there's lots of things going on that do have design implications. Now, you can define design as the rendering of intent. That's rendering in the sense of making it happen, rather than rendering in the sense of disposing of a body, hopefully. The designer Jared Spool, I think, came up with that definition of design. Certainly he uses it when he gives talks. And he gave a talk in Manchester last year using that definition to identify 2 easy ways to fail. So the first way to fail is to have the right intention, but to render it badly. So we might say that a lot of Microsoft software would come into that category. The heart's in the right place, but it doesn't always result in the right outcome for people trying to use their software. Failure route number 2 is to have a bad intention in the first place, but then to actually be surprisingly successful when you deliver it. So I would put Facebook into that category. Facebook originally was designed as a rather creepy way of commenting on the attractiveness of other students, which is not exactly a great ethical basis for any sort of software product, but here we are now. It's got so however many billion users it currently has. So if you're talking about intent, whose intent? Now, obviously, as designers, we have some kind of intention that we're starting from when we start thinking about a product, designing it, how we're going to build it, these kinds of things. Round about the time that UCLan was renaming its interaction design degree to be user experience design, Alan Cooper sent out this mischievous tweet saying, "There is no such thing as user experience design." It caused quite a stoogie. What he meant by that was that you cannot design how somebody will experience your product. That depends on them. So their history may have an impact. What's happened to them earlier in the day may affect their appreciation of what you've done. What they expect to happen later in the day may have an impact on how they react to what you've done. So you can't design their experience because their experience is a reaction. You can design for a good experience in the same sort of way that comedians hope you'll laugh at their joke. But whether you do or not depends on you, and you might have completely different reasons for laughing to the ones they actually expected. So sometimes people will like something for reasons you hadn't even considered, or hate it for reasons completely outside your control. Now, one of the nice examples of that I like to use is the Amaretti di Saronno cookies, the little almond biscuits. The company thought they were selling a nice little almond biscuit. But actually, a lot of people were buying them to set light to the wrappers and watch them spiral upwards. If you've not come across that, then there's lots of nice little clips on YouTube of people furling the wrappers into a little cylinder, putting it on their hand, setting light to the top of it, and then it carries itself up into the air on its own hot air. But if you look on Amazon.com, or at least in the past you could look on there, I think it's probably disappeared by now because it's getting rather old. There was a 1-star lowest satisfaction review of these cookies entitled, "What the heck did they do to the wrappers?" And that was dated Christmas Day, 2008. Now, this poor guy had sat down with his family, expecting to play their usual game with the wax paper wrappers that they used to have, and found that it didn't work anymore because the wrappers are now plastic. So what had happened there was that he had a completely different reason for enjoying those cookies to the one that the people who manufactured them had considered. Because as far as they were concerned, they were making a biscuit. They weren't worried about the wrappers. They were just wrappers. So designer intentions don't always get you to where you expect to be. You can draw a distinction between what the user of something intends and how they interact with it. And it's actually quite an important distinction to make. When we use things, we generally have an outcome in mind. We don't always have the ideal means of achieving that, so we will use what there is. You cannot know what I really wanted unless you ask me. And that's a really important part of any user experience process, is doing the user research to find out what the real need is. What we have to do with this eventual product to get the outcome that we want is the user interaction. That's the set of things that you make me do to achieve the thing I'm trying to do. What we have to do to get the outcome we're after may actually be different for different people. I happen to have typed the notes for this slide. I could have used the microphone to dictate them. If you have a version of Microsoft Office that has that dictation capability, I recommend you play with it if you haven't already. The mistakes can be very entertaining, but probably not if you're relying on it as your only means of input. So do think about that when you're thinking about design. What are people actually going to have to do to make this happen? Like most research students, I do a few hours of teaching each week, or at least I did during term time. We're on holiday at the moment in theory. Though for a PhD student, holidays are just things that happen to other people. They don't really exist. The things I asked our MSc students to think about in tutorials were, firstly, what problem do you want to solve? Then, who are you solving it for? What part will your solution play in their lives? And most importantly, which context do you expect that this is going to work in? Taken together, that's usually called user-centered design. Not everybody likes that term, and I'll say a bit about the word user in a moment, but it does distinguish it from what used to happen, where companies tried to sell us things by how many features they had. If you think back to certainly the 1990s and carrying on from then as well, still happens now, companies used to try and push things by how many features they had. And you knew when you'd got a product like that because the user guide would be a book, a literal small book. I've got an Olympus digital voice recorder that I use for doing my research interviews, and the user guide for that is a good centimetre thick. It's a good wad of paper. Most of the features in that I will probably never use, and even the ones I use, it's debatable whether I truly understand all the things they do for me or don't. So about 20 years ago now, Alan Cooper wrote a book called The Inmates Are Running the Asylum, and that was a reaction to that kind of product design where it was very focused on features and didn't really address what people were trying to do. Context is hard because there's a lot of it, and how it looks depends on where you're standing. If you describe someone as a user, you are already thinking about them from your point of view in relation to your product and not necessarily from their point of view. So user research can sometimes miss important questions like, why would somebody want an app for this? Is that really the best solution for them? The human context can be very complex. It might bring in expectations from the team that you're working in or your family. It might have some relation to where you are in a company or a community or as part of a wider society. So, for example, a few weeks ago, you might have proudly boasted of your clever algorithm. Well, who this week is going to be using the word algorithm in any advertising? That word is now toxic. So that societal context has now completely changed because of one bad instance of something that people now want to avoid. By contrast, what people actually have to do with the product, your user interactions, tend to be very quick. So it might just be a mouse click or doing something with a keyboard or saying something into a microphone. If it's a physical device, then maybe you need to press a button. But generally, they're very time-limited things. They don't take long to do, usually. I had the unfortunate experience last week of a Windows update that took about 9 hours to install. So that wasn't a very quick user interaction for me on that occasion. But generally, they're quite short, snappy things. The consequences of those interactions might be much longer term and may not be immediately obvious to the person they affect. So, for example, selecting something from a drop-down list might be fine if you're doing it once. But suppose you had to do that all day, every day, for the next 10 years. So you might actually be building in things like repetitive strain injury into an interface just by forcing people to do something that's rather long-winded and laborious when there might have been a better way of doing it. Now, one of the things that a lot of people are getting interested in at the moment is whether you can reuse user research. So the tweet I've used to illustrate this slide was a bit of a conversation that we had back in January, where we were trying to get to the bottom of, well, okay, you've gathered all this research on how people might respond to this design, this product that you've put together. Is that really telling you about the context, or is it telling you something fundamental about people? And depending on the answer to that might determine whether you can reuse that research or not. So that's something that people are actively thinking about at the moment. Some companies are starting to put together libraries of research they've done. But how much and when you can reuse previous research is debatable at the moment. So we've talked about the many layers of context that we have and how consequences can happen on very different timescales to the actions that trigger them. In recent years, we've seen how relatively simple software can suddenly go global. For example, who'd heard of Zoom before March this year? It was quite a niche little thing. Now suddenly it's everywhere. And of course, we're not all the same. We all have different needs. We all have different responses to things. If you're providing a service, that's really important. So my big question number one is, can our methods actually cope with more complex systems? Because they will need to. We know things are always going to be becoming more complex in one way or another. And can they cope with more complex user populations? Now, things need to cope rather better than they currently do already, but that is only going to be a bigger consideration as time goes on. Big question number two is, will the business actually give us enough time to find the answers to all these complex questions that we're going to get? Are we going to be able to completely answer those questions before we have to start cutting code? or do we need to overlap those activities and have a continuous user research process to go with our continuous delivery? Now, famously, Amazon delivers a new version of some of its software, whether that's its websites or its broader business services, every 11 seconds. That's how frequently they're putting out an update to their software. So that the real sort of hard end of continuous delivery. If you've got that kind of continuous delivery, then you probably need to have continuous learning as well to make sure that your understanding of the problem you're trying to solve is keeping up with what's actually happening in the real world. So between those two, you might find yourself in a bit of a tight corner. You might find that you can't slow down without stalling the project, which will make you very unpopular with your management. You might find you can't speed up without starting to miss things. Well, that then cause potential shock waves in the delivery of your product, all sorts of turbulence. Now, I'm using these aviation type terms because there is a thing in aviation called coughing corner, where you have a similar sort of idea. You can't slow down without stalling, you can't speed up without starting to go supersonic and getting shock waves. So if you imagine a very pointy graph with a top corner that you really don't want to be in, that's the sort of place that we may find ourselves ending up in with Agile UX processes, where we're coming up to the limits of how quickly we can understand things. So what we really need is somewhere flattening that curve and reducing the peaks in complexity, whether that's complexity of the actual product or complexity of the user population we're trying to design for, so that we can cope with that complexity. So I've borrowed this term interaction discovery from the pharmaceuticals industry. They use it when they're thinking about side effects of drugs. So for some years now, they've been doing some pretty heavy duty computing to see what happens when you put two drugs together. Do they interact with each other? You also find that the term interaction discovery is now being used a bit in safety and security analysis, but primarily I was taking it from the way that it's used in pharmaceuticals. We want to find our unintended consequences as early as we can, so that we can fix them as cheaply as we can with as little harm as we can. So what do people do at the moment? In big mission critical projects, what you'll tend to find is a lot of design and analysis is done at the front of the project. So these would be the big traditional waterfall model type projects, where you have quite defined phases and a big handoff document between each phase where you pass on the information that you've learned from the previous phase. Now, ideally, we want to approach things in a more agile way, so that we can avoid delivering things we don't really need, but also so that we can avoid delivering things where we don't really understand. Because what can often happen is that as you go through product development, you actually learn things you didn't know right at the beginning, or didn't fully understand right at the beginning. But it's a bit late because you've moved on in your phased design, and it's difficult to go back and reissue design documents that people have sweated blood over. So that tends to be building in failure in some ways in some of the big old waterfall model projects, whereas there isn't the opportunity to act on your learning, because it would mean going back and redoing so much of the earlier work. So currently there's lots of interest in agile user experience practice across industry and the public sector, and it tends to rely for gaining this understanding of how people are going to respond to the design on doing a lot of testing. So it'd be a lot of prototyping, a lot of usability testing, where real users of the current system or potential users of a future system will be given access to the prototype and allowed to use it and play with it, so that user researchers and the wider team can understand how they're going to react to that design and all the design choices that are built into that. So my question was, could we anticipate more? Could we actually prime ourselves to be better able to spot problems as they arise? So that's what's prompted my current PhD project, Interaction Discovery and Agile UX. It's a 3-year study. I've just about completed the first 2 years. I'm about to start the 3rd year of that research. It's self-funded because this tends to be the kind of thing that the normal research councils and people don't cover. Computing generally doesn't have a lot of underlying research councils with big pots of money, so I'm entirely self-funded. And what I've been doing so far is I've been holding workshops. Last face-to-face workshop I did was back in January. That was in Manchester. I started trying to do those about this time last year, but getting people to come along to those was always a bit of a challenge if you're a completely new face and you don't have any reputation to build on. Obviously, once lockdown kicked in, then all that face-to-face workshop stuff had to stop. So for the last couple of months, what I've been doing is online interviews, interviewing people who are in practice at the moment, UX practitioners, user researchers, business analysts, anyone who's involved in that early part of the design thinking. So they're not necessarily designers, they wouldn't necessarily describe themselves as designers, but people who are involved in that early thinking about what the product should be, if indeed there is a need for a product, and trying to get information on how people might relate to that product. So hopefully over the next 12 months, I'll also be doing some experiments to see whether we can help people to anticipate the problems that might come out of a design. I'm still looking for participants for the research. So if you're involved in user experience design in any way, then get in touch. It'd be great to talk to you. Interviews tend to be 20 to 30 minutes. So far, most people have opted for Zoom as their way of doing it, though I'm happy to use Google Meet. On my website, I've offered Microsoft Teams. I've even offered Skype. Strangely, nobody's gone for either of those 2 products. So I think that backs up what I said earlier about Microsoft having their heart in the right place, but not always delivering things in the way that people like. So as you can see on the slide there, that's the location of my website. It's a very basic website. If I tell you that the last website I built was in 1996, you'll perhaps get the impression that, yeah, I've still got some catching up to do. But it gives the basic details of what I'm up to and why and the methods I'm applying. So that's, I think, all I need to say about that as a general project. I'll open things up to questions now, I think. It's probably the best way to approach this.
Thanks, Kevin. Thank you very much. Fascinating stuff. And yeah, so please do. Hopefully, you people listening in can have enjoyed that and can see the how you can ask questions through the webinar software. I've got a question, Kevin. In terms of understanding those user interactions, like you say, some can be very quick and some can be take longer. How much do you think it helps to use technology to kind of monitor and capture and measure those user interactions? And is that any better than the kind of human way of just observing somebody using a piece of software?
I think even if you're doing it in a relatively low-tech way, then you need something to back up your own eyes and ears, because you will miss things on the first pass through. So at the very least, you probably want to take an audio recording if you're getting people to talk through what they're doing while they're doing it. So if they're using a sort of think aloud sort of protocol to help you understand what their understanding is when they're trying to work their way through the system. But ideally, you want cameras so that you can go back through it later and work out, how they got to where they were and what they've previously done before they did the thing that surprised you. Because until you actually see them do something strange, you don't know that the earlier things were relevant. So video is certainly very helpful. What you'll see people increasingly doing now that most of the user research is moving online, is that they'll have two channels. They'll have a direct channel with the participants, like we're doing now, where we've got some sort of either a bog standard thing like Zoom or Teams, or some more specialist software for doing that kind of thing. And then alongside that, they'll have a live stream to somewhere else, so they can have observers keeping an eye on the experiment while it's going on, and maybe taking notes and making a note of the time of anything interesting that happened.
But those
So
observers, I guess, aren't. Yeah, those observers aren't affecting the behaviour of the user by being remote, I guess.
Yeah, so you get a direct sort of online equivalent then to the sort of thing you might have if you go somewhere with a usability lab, where they'll have a two-way mirror, so they can observe people without them feeling that they're being observed. So they just let them use things naturally, but still observe them.
Excellent, thank you very much. We've got a few questions in. John has asked, have you taken any lessons about user interaction from the aviation industry?
Well, it's good that you should ask that, because that's my background. I've spent most of my life doing aviation related things. I started off designing algorithms for computer assisted air traffic control. I then did some work on safety modeling of TCAS just before we were reducing vertical separation over Europe. And then my final aviation related job before I went back to university was as part of the release to service team at Waterman. So I spent a lot of time talking to pilots then, reviewing cockpit video. So when I talk about coffin corner and things, it's good. That is my background.
That's my favourite new phrase, coffin corner.
Yeah.
Jade has also, I'll pass on Jade's thanks for an interesting presentation. And Jade's wondering what got you interested in UX research? Obviously, you must be interested because you're doing a 3-year study and it's self-funded. So I guess your level of interest is high.
What I was hoping when I started was that I would talk to lots of designers doing these new leading edge things that was all new and wonderful, and I would learn something from them that we could then apply to the sorts of more traditional techniques we were using to do safety analysis in aviation. What I'm starting to think now that I've spoken to lots of UX people, is that actually they might benefit from some of the things we do in aviation. Some of the ways we use to think about safety and think about the things that can go wrong. The anticipation methods that have been used for donkey's years in aviation might actually be useful in UX. So that's what got me into thinking about UX. But always in my career, I've been partly thinking about human factors. So that led into it quite naturally, really.
Thank you very much. I can see that Adrian says he's got 2 questions. I haven't seen your 2 questions yet, Adrian, so if you can enter them in the questions box, that'd be great. I'm aware, Kevin, that as a business analyst, I feel like I might be a terrible dabbler in user experience design. From the interviews that you've had, how much do you think I've also dabbled, but also worked with some really good user experience designers. How much do you think, what's the impact of the UX design either not being done or being done very badly, maybe by a dabbling business analyst, for example?
Well, ideally, you want to have a cross-functional team where you've got all the relevant people involved right from the start, so that as well as user researchers seeing how people relate to the product, the rest of the team see it as well, so that when you say, now actually there's a bit of a problem with this, then you're pushing it an open door, because development team have already seen it. They've seen people getting confused, they've seen people doing the unexpected thing. So what tends to happen when that doesn't happen, and when you've just got stovepipe bits of information not getting fully passed on, is that you end up having to go back and fix things at much greater expense later on, and you've already upset loads of people by that point, so you might have lost customers you would otherwise have retained. So that's how you'll notice if your UX is not going well, is that people won't be coming back and buying your next product.
I feel like I may be guilty of causing that to happen, but who knows? Hopefully, it's not directly measurable. We've got Adrian has asked a question. Do you find screen recording and mouse recording software like hotjar.com useful, and how would you recommend these are best used?
I don't have any direct experience of those kinds of products because that's not the kind of research I'm doing, but certainly they are very widely used. A lot of analytics goes into user experience activities these days. There'll be quite a lot of data crunching to see where on the screen people are giving their attention. And you can see when you look at the conversion figures that people give for people actually going from taking interest in a product to buying it, that just some simple rearrangement of data on the screen to be where people are giving their attention can make quite a big difference. So all those sorts of analytic tools are well used and very useful if that's the kind of thing that is driving your activity.
Excellent, thank you. Peter has yes, it's not so much a question but more a comment, an interesting comment about comparing it to the health service and saying there's a similar situation with the health service as I think as you were describing with aviation. It doesn't matter if it's agile or waterfall, there's a requirement for a clinical safety review.
Yeah. And actually some of the papers that come out of the health sector are really good things to read when you're trying to get your head around some of these issues, because the medical profession has had to deal with the consequences of their actions in a far more fundamental way than the rest of us are necessarily used to doing. So they've had to think about these things for a long time. So certainly taking an interest in health informatics would always be useful for anyone with an interest in UX design, because that's the hard end of the problem, where you notice quite quickly if it's not right.
Yeah, I can share one experience for me was having been a software developer in a previous life for clinical decision support software, and I think we started small with a small set of customers, small set of users in a particular environment, and then as the software became successful, which was great, we also found that the environments changed and expanded. So not just, for example, a hospital clinic, but also a GP surgery, and then a pharmacy, and then a hospital laboratory like a pathology lab, and that really raised lots of different questions about how people were using it, and we had to get much more canny and explicit about how we advise people to use the software. And I guess that's what you were describing.
Hence my
really,
concern about scalability, because you would have made assumptions when it was a small product, and then as the context gets bigger and bigger and more complex, then some of those assumptions may need to be challenged because they may no longer be true.
Yeah.
So it's knowing you've made the assumptions is the first problem, because sometimes you'll do something, you'll make a decision without realizing that actually there was a choice there. You could have done something different.
Yeah, absolutely. It was very tricky. We've got a couple more questions in. So Tim has asked, as with your aviation experience, do you feel like the advanced automation used in cockpits has become too complicated to provide good UX for pilots?
Well, I read something earlier today that said about 79% of fatalities are down to human factors in aviation.
Wow.
So yeah, it's not good. And there have been issues with cockpit interfaces right from the get-go, really. We've had aircraft that have been directed on the wrong route and ended up flying into a mountain because someone's just selected the wrong navigation waypoint, things like that. Simple supposedly simple issues have had catastrophic consequences.
Yeah.
So there's always been a bit of an issue with the complexity of things in cockpits. So it's, yeah.
Yeah. Complex environments, and yeah, there's I remember, and it kind of chimes, I think, when somebody describes it to you. If you think about yourself driving along the road, there's an awful lot of input as a user of a car to have to deal with in terms of traffic and traffic lights and road signs and lines on the road. Again, I suppose, is this something that's, with that kind of overwhelming amount of information, and yet the human brain still manages to make sense of it? And I know myself, arrive at my destination and kind of go, oh, I don't remember that at all. How did I get here? I guess there's quite a lot about the human brain that we're more observing rather than understanding as we do this, this user experience design.
Yeah, which is why when people claim they've built a self-driving car, you should take that claim with a very big pinch of salt. And when we start having to have roads where we've got human-driven cars and autonomous cars on the same bit of tarmac, then that's going to be, well, interesting in inverted commas.
Yeah. Would you drive a self-driving car? Would you sit in a self-driving car, Kevin, at the moment?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, good answer.
Because I think people are pushing ahead way beyond our current understanding of the technology.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Isaac Asimov's I, Robot series of stories, I think, talks about a time when actually it's people are prosecuted for driving a car themselves, really, because it's much more unsafe than it is for the car to drive themselves. But I guess we're quite a long way off that, both in terms of ethical and legal implications.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how insurance works for self-driving cars.
It is. Oh, there's a whole that we're shaping up the next event very nicely. The next speakers, I'm sure. Sounds good. Adrian has asked a second question. I'm going to read out what Adrian said because I can't process it fast enough. As you mentioned, Kevin, you said you can't know what I really want unless you ask me, is what a user might say. And Adrian designs websites and always asks the business owner what they want, but it's not often they actually ask the website visitors what they want. Always we can assume what they want, but we can get that wrong. And so Adrian's question is, what do we do if the user is uneducated in the scenario? So, for example, if you've got a client who's a manufacturer and they offer samples, if the user doesn't know samples are available, they might not want one, but they might want one if they know about it. So how can we actually educate people in that user experience whilst meeting the needs that they know about? That was a long question, I'm afraid.
Right. Well, if that's something that's available from that manufacturer, then wouldn't you want to say that on the website?
Mm-hmm.
So that you're queuing them, priming them to say, yes, please send me a sample.
So we need to
So you're
help the
nudging
user
people
understand their need.
into that sales funnel by making them interested in the product, by at least letting them know it exists. If they don't know it's there, then they're not going to be clicking on any button that buys it, are they?
Good point. There is something about oh yeah, and Adrian is very kindly responding to that. He said a sample is one thing. They might prefer a quote or a brochure or something else. How do we help them understand what it is they need? Do we give them a long list of everything they could possibly want, or is there a kind of a more interactive and adaptive way to help the user realize what it is that they can get from the site that they're visiting, do you think?
Yeah, you need to be careful about information overload. If you're looking at one little screen full of information, if you're try and cram too much into there, then they're just going to look at it and go, ugh, yuck. So you need to think about the most important bit of information that they need at each stage through the process, and make sure that the thing they can see and is most prominent is the thing that's most important at that point.
Are there, Kevin, that you know of, are there kind of technology solutions that help with that then, in terms of how websites can be built to have the website almost kind of self-adapting based on the user's interaction?
I'm sure there are people who will try and sell you all sorts of weird and wonderful tools, but there's no real substitute to actually talking to people and finding out what it is they're actually trying to do and what their real needs are.
I would, as a business analyst, I would second that for sure.
Yeah, there's no substitute for a conversation. A conversation is worth any amount of tools.
Yeah, absolutely. Or yes. Adrian has suggested a chat bot as well. I guess you can have a conversation, an automated
horrors.
conversation.
Yeah, my own personal experience of chatbots has not been great. What tends to happen is you end up talking to a chatbot when you've got a problem, and you say what your problem is, and then an hour later somebody might get back to you. So my thoughts about chatbots are a bit jaded by that.
Yes, fair enough. Jade has asked, would you be able to recommend any resources or books focused on UX? Is there anything that you know of that you could recommend, or how do people find out more if you need to know more?
A good place to look actually is to look at what the Government Digital Service has done, because they've been very open about their process right from the start. So if you have a Google on Government Digital Service, or GDS, and handbook, you'll probably find their materials that way. But a lot of government departments have invested a lot in user experience design. So that's where I'd probably start, is looking for the stuff on Gov UK, because they've got quite a good blog and there's a lot of material on there. They've been very open.
Thanks, Kevin. I know I've got a couple of colleagues I'm working with at the moment who would agree with you very much, I think, on that. So that's good to hear. I know the BCS have just recently published a book, I think, haven't they? User Experience Foundations, in the last 6 weeks or so, I think. I think it is a very much a foundations book in UX design, and it's trying to be a lot of things to a lot of people, I think. But yeah, and I'm aware of that being a recent publication, and something that is kind of a companion volume to the Foundation Certificate in User Experience.
The other place to look is YouTube. A lot of the companies that are active in this area have quite good YouTube channels.
Excellent, good stuff. Yeah, a very rich resource there. John is wondering if there's been any, or have you done any research into the user experience of disabled people?
Well, because they're providing a service that has to work for everybody, a lot of the civil service work on UX has been very much focused on accessibility.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah, if you look at some of the GDS materials, then a large part of that will be making sure that things are accessible. And certainly from the design ethics point of view, that's been the focus of a lot of work in recent years.
Yeah. Is it hard, you know, to, if you've got a website or a system that isn't meeting the accessibility standards, is it a redesign to make them meet those standards, do you think? Is it something that can be adapted kind of with minimum work, or is it a rethink if you didn't start with those kind of accessibility needs in mind?
Ideally, all these things, whether it's accessibility, safety, security, all of the sort of quality aspects of a product, you really need to treat them like the lettering in the Blackpool Rock. You know, they need to be there right from the start, and they need to run through everything you do. Otherwise, it's going to start feeling clunky if you try and bolt them on afterwards. So it probably depends on how big the shortfall is between what you've got and where it needs to be, what approach you take, whether you try and fix it or whether you start again.
Sure. Thank you. That's great. I think we are need to come to a close. Actually, lots of questions and lots of great feedback from everybody. Thank you for those questions. I think we've managed to cover them all, which is good. But obviously, if it occurs to anybody for the rest of the session, please do post a question, and we'll try and, if we've got time at the end, pick them up. But thank you, Kevin, very much for your time and the fascinating talk.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me do the tricky bit of taking back the screen, and we can move on to our next talk, which is from John Verity, the Digital Inclusion Development Manager at Age UK. I've said Age UK Blackburn. Age UK Blackburn with Darwen. John, apologies for that.
No problem. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, John. I will share the website, and I can swap to the other pages if need be, but I'll hand over to you, John. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me along to speak at this event tonight. Like Mark says, my role at Age UK is Digital Inclusion Development Manager, which is a rather grand title, I think, for a fairly straightforward and simple job. Some of my work colleagues prefer to call me Dr. Gadget. I don't know why, but I guess it slips off the tongue a bit easier. But yeah, I've been in post for 3 years at Age UK as Digital Inclusion Development Manager, and I've worked on 2 projects. Prior to this one, I worked on the One Digital project, which was similar aims, 6 pilot projects throughout the UK. Really, simply put, the overall aim of the projects that I've worked on is to increase digital inclusion amongst over 50s, particularly in the borough of Blackburn with Darwen, but previously in parts of Lancashire as well. But this project that I'm working on now is specifically in Blackburn with Darwen. Age UK's service user or client group starts at 50. That's when people are eligible to use our services. That surprises some people. People often think that's quite a young age. The majority of the people who use the digital inclusion service tend to be over 65, over 70. There are some people in the 50s who use the service as well, who get support from us, but primarily it's people in their over 65, 70 years old, something like that. I suppose this is illustrated by out of 4 million people in the UK who wouldn't describe themselves as going online regularly, 3.7 million of that 4 million are people over the age of 65. So you can imagine that our client group, there's a large proportion of our client group that don't regularly go online. So there's the overall aim, like I said, is to increase digital inclusion amongst that group. The key targets there's 3 key targets. The first one being to have digital conversations with 600 over 50s. What that means is just bring up the subject, just talk about digital inclusion, just talk about the devices that people use or the reasons why people aren't online. Prior to lockdown, that meant things like going into sheltered housing accommodation or going to visit sports clubs or crafts groups, and just talking about digital inclusion and asking people what they thought of it, why might not use devices, what kind of things were popular amongst older people, what kind of things did people do. And I found that carrying out that conversation, it kind of broke down a lot of barriers for people. A lot of older people realised that they weren't on their own. They weren't the only one who was having difficulty with devices or getting online. And also they heard encouraging stories from other people about the benefits of being online and what they get out of it. And often there's a perception that when you go out to groups is that you've got to know everything about a computer or a smartphone to get something out of that device, and we soon kind of break that down and talk about using devices for, like we all do, for things that benefit us, not just because we're for the sake of using the device. So when you got groups of people talking about that, there was lots of interest, and like I said, it broke down a lot of barriers. However, as everyone is aware, things have changed quite dramatically because of lockdown. So those conversations that have been taking place now haven't been in groups or in social settings like that, but have been over the telephone. When we went into lockdown, it was kind of, for the Age UK staff, including myself, it was like all hands to the pump. Care needs, providing for people's well-being, making sure that people were getting food boxes delivered and that all the essential needs were being catered for. As time moved on, we kind of developed our calls a little bit and started to ask digital questions, really. So we carried out what was, again, fairly grandly titled a digital diagnostic questionnaire. Quite simple, really, finding out, do people own devices? What do they use those devices for? Do people go online? If not, why not? Would people like help to do it? And what did that tell us? Well, not surprisingly, really, we kind of knew this from our previous work. The majority of service users that we come into contact with do have devices. They do have, they tend to be family members of either passed on devices, second-hand phones, tablets, all sorts of different devices, or people have been bought devices as a gift, something to other family members saying you should get online with this, you should be included. But what people were reporting to us, and what they still report to us, is that people pass them the device, give them the the gift or whatever, and say it's as simple as this, and spend about 2 or 3 minutes with them, and they're lost. The devices go in the drawer, they go in the back in the boxes, and they don't use them. So it's not necessarily about equipment. Often connection can be a problem, particularly recently with social places like libraries not being open to the general public. Often people went to libraries to get online. That hasn't been available to people. So they might have had devices, but nowhere to use them, nothing to connect to. I suppose anecdotally, out of the work that we've done, what people want to be able to do with the devices, what people want to be able to get online for, and more so during lockdown, is to be able to communicate with friends and family. Like Kevin said, Zoom has gained immense popularity through lockdown. Our service users are the same as anyone else. They're interested, they want to find out more about it, particularly as they're aware that they can talk to friends, family in other parts of the country, especially those who are particularly socially isolated or are have been sheltered during lockdown. It becomes an even more pressing need that they can get online and talk to other people. Again, anecdotal. I've no real clear evidence for this, but colleagues working in this area as well would say there tends to be a reluctance amongst our service users to engage in financial transactions online. There's a wariness. Security is a big issue for people. I know that when I was going out and talking to groups in sheltered housing, if you were talking to a group of 10 people, there'd often be someone in that group who had been scammed, who had been ripped off. So you had to kind of allay some of those fears. So I suppose the largest issue that people come to us with is wanting to get online to communicate with family members, to talk to other people, like many of us. Shopping as well has become a bigger issue through lockdown, and people using those kind of services. So the second target, as well as discussing what people might want to get online for and the benefits of being online and some of the barriers, is to provide interventions to help people actually get online. So again, I suppose down the years, our unique selling point really has been that we've been able to offer one-to-one lessons to people, and that's something that really appeals to older people. They tend to be kind of reluctant to go into a group situation because they're embarrassed about asking questions sometimes, or that they feel the pace of the group is wrong for them in either direction. Sometimes people feel group sessions go too slowly. So one of the unique things we've been able to offer is one-to-one interventions, and that's been really popular. Again, we can't offer that now during lockdown, so we've replaced that by telephone sessions. So the people that we surveyed previously, when they've indicated that they've wanted some support or some kind of guidance or coaching or direction, we've been contacting those people by telephone, sometimes online as well. It tends to be things like setting up emails, using Zoom. Some people are perhaps a bit past that stage and they want to join online groups that we have at Age UK, physical activity groups, social groups. So it's enabling that to happen. So we tend to ring people up, spend 30 minutes to an hour or so working through whatever issue it is people have got, whatever people want to do online. We are able to send out written instructions to people, so we might capture the session that we've done in a number of screenshots, and send out paper copies to people, so then we can ring them up the following week and guide them through the session as well, which is really popular with people. It's presented a challenge to us really, not being able to see people face to face, but we are able to offer a service. We are able to make progress. People do feel it's beneficial, and people are engaging with the service. So although it's different than seeing people face to face, it's still beneficial for people. And so we're encouraging that intervention really. Our third target, and perhaps one of the reasons I appeal to you tonight, is to recruit digital champions, because as you can imagine, spending quite intensive time with people, 30 minutes, an hour at a time, you need quite a number of people to do that. We've recruited members of BCS already to be digital champions, and they're ringing people up and guiding them through some of the processes that we've talked about: shopping online, setting up emails, setting up Zoom, that kind of thing, and giving their time. And I think I would say in the 3 years in post that I've been involved in this digital inclusion work, I think the main thing that people would say to us about the service is that the difference is time and patience. That's what older people are looking for, not necessarily the devices or you know, the technical expertise. A little bit of that's required, but what people are really looking for, what people really appreciate is someone just to spend time with them and say, this is how it works. And also, you know, so they feel confident that they're not going to be embarrassed, that they can ask questions, that they can ask fairly simple, straightforward things. So I think that's where that's what we offer to people, really, is you know, some expertise about the technology, but mainly time to guide people through the processes, as well as you know, that's all well and good. We offer that time, patience, and really it's a bit of a plea if people feel they've got those attributes, that you feel like you could talk to older people, and that you feel that you've got a spare bit of time, perhaps at the moment you know, furloughed or something like that, and you think that maybe you could spend some time contacting people. That's something that you know, we'd benefit from very much. As well as those things, the time and the support, we can also offer, in conjunction with a local company, 6G, have been connecting people free of charge to broadband. It seems too good to be true, but it is really true that this company have offered the support to Agile UK. They're connecting people free of charge, no strings attached. We've only had, you know, so far a handful of people who have taken part in it and got connected to broadband that they haven't been previously, but that service is available. We have quite a decent number, you know, around 100 tablet computers that we can loan out. We tend to loan them out for a month, you know, encourage people to have a go, see if it's for them. It sometimes in conjunction with the 6G connection. And we've got a small number of devices, like we have some Google Homes, Google Minis that we can use for, you know, particularly where there's people require assistive technology. Hopefully the project's going to run until we get to a situation where we're seeing people face to face. So if people are thinking, you know, that's something I'd like to do, but I prefer to see people face to face in social situations, you know, if you express any interest at this stage and you would like to support us in the work, you know, that's where we feel the work will be heading, hopefully sooner rather than later. So I think Mark will be sending out my details, so I'll not read them out here and now, but they're available, and I believe there's been a flyer circulated as well with our details on. So I'll end it there, and if people want to ask questions, as long as they're not too technical, I'm more than happy to answer them.
I was going to ask you how to use this webinar software, John, actually, but just about that.
I said not too technical, Mark.
And yeah, we can see your contact details there on the screen.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
John, there was a certainly an email sent out. I'll make sure there's something on the LinkedIn page as well about that. Certainly sounds like a really worthwhile service. Just by chance, I was walking down the street the other day, and I was going to say bumped into my neighbour. We skirted around each other on the narrow pavement, and yeah, she was trying to set up a large online group for her Women's Institute meeting that she's the chair of, and kind of really struggling. And actually, they were having a go, but really struggling to kind of get past the kind of teething troubles, really. And it's hard, isn't it, with something like that, where you kind of only get to practice it when you've got a lot of people online, and then that's the time when you need to kind of make it work straight away. So it's a difficult situation, isn't it?
Yeah, I think people have perhaps been a little bit caught out by this. People who, previously have said it's not for me, it's something I'm interested in, and now they're in a situation where they want to get online, but it's so difficult because people can't. Certainly for our service users, people can't go into the houses, or they might be, shielding, and so people can't get close to them. So it's another degree of difficulty, isn't it, in setting up a device or getting something going. It's added another layer really to the complexity, I think.
Yeah.
But it is possible. It's definitely possible. We can. A lady who I'd previously seen face to face, and I knew she had a tablet, and I had to set up Zoom on the tablet, and then with her looking at each other, and she said, "There's a fella on my screen." I said, "Yeah, it's me." So it is possible to do from remotely, but a bit more difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure it's a challenge. If somebody is interested in becoming a digital champion, and if anybody is, just to remind you, if you got any questions or comments, please do post them. Would be welcome. But yeah, as a digital champion, how much kind of time do you think it's reasonable to expect people to spend? What's the commitment that it's going to be a useful commitment for people to offer?
Well, I think things are different again now, in that people can be based at home, and as long as they're calling older people, I think between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. really, Monday to Friday, that's a reasonable. And so what I've done is kind of allocated cases to the digital champions and said, please give them a ring when you can, and see what kind of support they need. If they do need information sending out, then we've done it from our business support. So in that respect, it's more flexible than when we was asking people to come into an office and sit with people for an hour at a time. So you can call people up, within reason, whenever it fits in. And so if you said, I could commit to doing an hour a week or something, that'd be useful for us, really. It wouldn't need to be a major commitment. And then, as things develop, if people think in the future that's something I'd want to do more of, that's a different matter then. But I suppose we're moving away from the idea of more formal volunteers who are recruited as volunteers and signed up, towards the idea of digital champions, really.
I'm shocked into a reaction, being one of the over 50s now, I must admit. But certainly, yeah, I certainly feel like I could offer some time and a little bit of a ability. Like you say, I can see it being a challenge to support people, say, over the phone, but I'm sure it is. It is possible.
It is possible, yeah.
As Adrian, thank you for your input. Adrian online has suggested maybe Kevin could design a chatbot to help Age UK. So that'd be a nice joining up. Tim has asked as well, do you find that any particular demographic has been more severely deprived in terms of accessibility to technology, or is it more of a universal problem affecting a much wider group of people?
I suppose it tends to be universal amongst the over 65s, and then we know where digital inclusion is more likely, where there's high levels of poverty, where people are got disabilities. So all those factors on top, as well as age, you know, most areas of Blackburn with Darwen have fairly good connectivity, but you know, some of the more rural areas, that's an issue really. For the over 65s, it tends not to be so much not being able to afford to be online or get the equipment. It tends to be that they don't see it as part of their life. So it's looking for, you know, a hook, something that gets people, like we all do. We all, you know, many of us will use digital technology across our lives, and I think there's always something for everyone. You know, so if you can identify that something for people, you know, that tends to get them more included. Really, it's often a choice. It's often a choice that people say, you know, it's not for me. I don't want to. So it's like a matter of persuasion, really, and saying, this is what you could get out of it. This is how we can go about, you know, engaging people.
Sure, sounds
Yeah.
good. Are there any, just maybe as a final question as we bring it to a close, I remember applying unsuccessfully for a job as an e-government officer for a local county council in previous years, and it was very important then that services weren't just available online but available in other ways to avoid a kind of a digital divide.
Yeah.
Growing up. Is that still the case now, or is it more expected that people have to go online to access any kind of local government services?
Many local government services are heading towards digital by default. So there are some people who are, you know, isolated from those services. You know, often people will rely on family members to, for example, sign up for you know, a new waste bin or something like that. I think the only way you can do that is online. So that really excludes a large number of people. But like I said previously, people use library services. There's support in there. But yeah, I mean, it's increasingly becoming, you know, that people are losing out by not being online. It's becoming a necessity, isn't it? Really. So yeah.
Yeah, it becomes the service that we rely on more. We notice it when the internet isn't available at home or at work or even outside on the go, really, don't we?
Yeah, you know, I suppose I walked into a bank a few weeks ago, you know, and I know things are quiet at the moment, but I was amazed that they just, I never go in because I use online banking, and when you go in a bank now, it's just kind of people guiding you to terminals, isn't it? And not, you know, you don't see kind of tellers in the same way as you did previously. So, you know, that's you know, commercial services, I guess, heading towards that way of interacting. So other services, local government as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a common direction, isn't it?
Increasingly important, really. But like I said, you know, often, you know, if you said to people, sign up, get online, and then you can start doing your banking, people are really reluctant. What we tend to do is try to encourage, like I said about, you know, the crafts groups and things like that. When I went out to visit people like that, you know, small craft groups, and people were using YouTube to learn about painting, and you know, and that's the hook that they're into. They're already using that technology. You know, I've talked to people who said, well, I don't use computers, but I use Skype. You know, so they don't see it in the same way.
No.
So it's kind of getting people familiar with the equipment before they move on to you know, to use it for accessing services, really.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, there's a lot of
like
personal
that.
benefit. Yeah, a lot of well-being, I guess, health and well-being benefits of using it
yeah,
how you can.
yeah, that's right.
Well, thanks, John, for that. Thanks for your time and for questions from everybody. Yeah, John's details are there on the screen, and we'll follow them up perhaps with an email and a LinkedIn post as well as a reminder. And it certainly sounds like a really worthwhile way of helping our community. You know, the BCS, one of the BCS aims is making IT good for society. So it feels like sometimes it's hard to see how you can do it yourself, doesn't it? And actually, this seems to be a really straightforward way that you can plug into that. And it's a great local service, isn't it? So thank you, John, and thanks to Age UK. Thank you very much. So if I may, just for the last few minutes, just maybe mentioned at the start, there has been a survey that's doing the rounds the last couple of weeks, and it's still early days. There's still an opportunity to take that survey, and we just want to hear from branch members about what it is that they're expecting, their experience so far, and what they're expecting from their branch, and what will be useful. Thinking about our user interactions so far, I guess we don't want to assume what our branch members want. The best thing to do is to ask the question and hear what people want. So what I did want to do, just as a little bit of interest really, just to share the results so far. So it's you know, small numbers so far. It's 22 people who have, as of lunchtime today anyway, responded to the survey. It's a good response to start with, but if anybody hasn't on the call today, please do. It's the link is actually in the invitation for the Eventbrite invitation. So just to share a couple of the results so far. In terms of how long people have been BCS members, certainly we can see the majority have been BCS members long term, 8 years or more, but we've definitely got a good broad mix of new members and newish members as well, less than a year, 1 to 3 years, and 4 to 7 years. So I think that's certainly a good message that there's people who understand how they can you know, interact with BCS, and maybe people who are still looking for opportunities and what the BCS membership can offer them, which is good and interesting to know. We asked how often we think branch events should be held. It's a big relief that nobody thinks we should do it monthly, because it's not a completely easy thing to do. So thank you for that. The majority certainly think 3 or 4 times a year is a good frequency. And be interesting to hear any more from that, and we'll hear more survey responses in the next few weeks. I guess the interesting thing at the moment is, whereas you know, previously, actually, I know I've certainly seen a lot of comments on various BCS chat rooms and emails about an awful lot of events being London based, and it's quite difficult, say in the Northwest where we are, to tie in with those. Now almost every BCS event is virtual and online, and so we can actually take a lot of advantage of that and hook into those events that other local branches and kind of central BCS head office arrange. So there's certainly an awful lot of great events out there and interesting speakers, as we've had tonight. So that's good to know. We've also asked, you know, what would people actually find interesting if we got other speakers in? What would they like to hear? Thank you, Adrian, for that previous slide. He's pointed out I didn't include daily as an option. I think monthly. Daily, well, maybe taking on Kevin's point about continuous delivery needs continuous learning. Maybe with a little bit of extra work, we could do a daily event, but maybe there's a bit more learning to do before then. So in terms of, yeah, what topics would find interesting, again, early days for the survey responses to get any kind of common themes coming out, but certainly we've had a broad range of answers so far. Artificial intelligence and machine learning, a few mentions of digital inclusion and security, Also mentions of current challenges and current trends and just general networking. So that's what we're hearing so far. But again, if you haven't actually taken part in that survey, please do, because that'd be really good to hear from you. And we'll look forward to that. When we get the results, we will share them more widely so everybody can see that, what the main messages are coming out. We'll also mention that interesting response has been, we said, are you aware of the BCS Preston Branch group on LinkedIn? And if yes, are you a member? Certainly the vast majority, over 80%, just weren't aware of the LinkedIn group. Not clear, my fault for asking maybe the limited question, is that because people actually don't use LinkedIn? That might be the case. I'm not sure of the ubiquitousness, if that's a word, of the use of LinkedIn. It's certainly a networking tool I find useful, but certainly this is something we'd like to just highlight, that there is a BCS Preston Branch group. So if you are a LinkedIn member or you want to become a LinkedIn member, please do, and it's a great way for us to keep in touch, I think, with members, as in a nice, straightforward, easy way. We've also asked, again, a little bit early days, but certainly in terms of, we asked people to name one thing that would improve the branch. And actually what's useful and what's reassuring is hopefully we're starting to address some of these things already. We've heard about from John and Age UK about involvement with the community, a way of supporting our local community. That's great. We're starting to do more frequent communication, and we've had our first event for a while, although we've had big events, the cybersecurity events, which have been really good, really well organised. Thanks, Adrian, and have been really good networking opportunities. And we've also got the opportunity here to do, if you like, more local, smaller scale events as well, which would be great. So again, these are the kind of messages coming out, but we will hear more over time. That survey is still going, so please do. The link's there, but I'm not expecting you to write that one down. The link is in the event invitation, so please do follow that and participate. Send it to your BCS friends and they can participate too. Thank you very much. So as coming to a close, I do want to say a really big thanks to Kevin Rigotti and to John Verity for their time and their effort in preparing for tonight's session. Hopefully all of you attending have found it really useful as much as I did, and very interesting. Thank you to all you attending as well for all of your time and attention. I'm sure it's been after a really long day. Thank you for your questions that you sent in. It's been really good. Please share any comments via LinkedIn or any other ways that you can, and complete that survey if you haven't done. Also need to say thanks to Adrian and Tim, my fellow branch committee members, for trying out the survey and giving some great feedback in advance. And BCS, I must say, Kerry at BCS and other people on the member support have been really good at helping us set up the event and providing that support. So I'm sure, thinking of the 3 or 4 events in a year, maybe we can look out for another event, maybe around November. So please keep an eye on LinkedIn, email, and the BCS events calendar on the BCS website. So I think, again, thank you to Kevin and John, and thank you all for attending, and we'll bring the event to a close. Hope you have a good evening and stay safe and well, and look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you. Good night.